Hello everyone, this is Raven Ironwing and welcome back to my channel. Today I want to dive right into one of many videos that are going to be part of a series on the existence code. Now a lot of this is stuff that I've talked about in the past in videos that I've since taken down, but I'm redoing them for an important reason. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty parts of the existence code and some of the more interesting things of it, and before I talk too much about different stories and experiences that I've had and that I have had others share with me that relate to the existence code, I want to instead talk about the impossibility of knowing. Now, people often say that science and religion are both ways of knowing, but are they really? So, religion is not a way of knowing. Religion is a way of believing. It's just a set of dogmas, a set of rules, a set of beliefs that are based off of traditions. There's no concrete, immutable knowledge. No religion has proof that God exists in the way that they say such a God should exist. No religion has proof of so many things. And even if they did have proof of certain things, it's not really a way of knowing. The whole structure of religion is focused off of belief. It's a belief system, not a knowledge system. Now, you might think, well, science is a lot more concrete, right? Well, I often want to stress that science is not a way of knowing either. Science is a way of categorizing our observations into laws. It is a way of describing what we have seen in the past and what we see in the present in a way that we take a bunch of laws, put them together, and can make predictions and can accurately describe things using models. That's what science is. But science is not a set of immutable facts. Our scientific understanding has changed and evolved a lot over time. So we have a lot of sets of equations and theories and such, and they have changed over time. And that's not a bad thing. So, changing theories are a part of good science. Science adopts better theories as it discovers better ways of describing things. And if it didn't change and evolve, that would be bad. Because there are always better ways of describing the way things happen. A classic example of this is gravity. Galileo came along and came up with some equations that describe how objects fall when they're near the surface of the Earth. And that helped us understand things like the acceleration due to gravity and how that affects everything in the same sort of way if you take out air friction. So everything is going to fall at the same rate if we take out air friction. Galileo discovered that. Then Newton came along and showed that all objects in the universe are attracted through gravity because they have mass, and he came up with this law of universal gravitation. Now, this didn't discount anything Galileo discovered, it just built upon that and was a lot more precise and a lot more useful and a lot more universal. Then Einstein came along and showed that mass is a measure of the energy content of something, and that gravity can more accurately be described by curvatures in space-time. So all of these theories on gravity built on each other and described gravity in a very different way. Yet, they all work in certain realms. So, theories evolve and change over time, and that's good science. So, another thing to discuss is scope. Some theories describe certain situations really well, but they don't describe other situations very well, so we formulate other theories for a different scope. So general relativity describes the behavior of matter on a very large scale, like planets and black holes and things, and stars and galaxies. But when it comes to very tiny things, like we see in the quantum realm, when we are dealing with subatomic particles, then quantum physics does a much better job at describing things on that very tiny scale. But if we blow that up to the larger scale, quantum physics does a horrible job at explaining stars and gravity on a larger scale. So, does this mean that any particular theory is right or wrong? No, they're both right, but they only work in certain realms. And that's true with any theory. Any theory only works in the realm it was created for. So scientists gladly accept better theories. This is something that we have been doing for hundreds of years. If a better theory comes along that explains things more accurately, then scientists will gladly accept it if it's proven to work. So, why did I go through all of this? I went through all of this to help you understand that the purpose of science is to describe what we observe. It's not a set of immutable facts. The way we observe things and the way we interpret what we observe things changes over time. Now, often in religion, and I grew up in a very religious family and a very religious community, in religion, we are often taught that doubt is bad. There's the whole saying about doubting Thomas, and he's shamed for doubting that Jesus came back from the dead because he hadn't seen it yet. So in religion, there's this shame around doubt, and believing without doubt is seen as honorable. It's seen as conviction and something that we should aim for. But is this really the way things are? Or should be? Is doubt really bad? Is accepting that we do not know a bad thing? No, I mean, if you look at the history of scientific breakthroughs in any branch of science or the medical field or whatever, questioning the way things have always been leads to doing things in a better way. It leads to new discoveries. We always need to question the way things have been done and the way things have been understood in order to progress. So this idea that doubt and lack of conviction are bad is something we need to weed out of our minds. We need to weed that out of our hearts and accept that it's okay to not know. It's okay to question. Not only that, it's preferred to accept that we do not know. It's preferred to question, to ask questions like, what is the purpose of life? Do we really understand what gravity is? Like, why does matter cause gravity in the first place? Can we describe why matter causes gravity in the first place? Yeah, it's curvatures of space-time, but what are curvatures of space-time? And what is space and what is time for that matter? What does all of this even mean? It's okay and it's good to question. We need to question. Questioning ultimately leads us to progress. So, with that in mind, think about this. We think that we see with our eyes, but according to different studies and observations that I've come across, only 10 to 30% of what we actually see in our minds comes from our eyes. So only 10 to 30%, this very small percentage, less than a third of what we visually experience in our heads comes from our eyes. The rest is generated by our minds based on our experience and what we expect to see. In other words, up to 90%, 70 to 90% of what we see, our brain is effectively hallucinating. Now, why is this the case? It's the case because there's so much visual information coming into our eyes, literally at the speed of light, and that's a lot of information. And our mind has to process things effectively faster than it's capable of doing so. So what it will do is gather up as much information as it can within that snippet of time and then fill in the gaps. Now, the less light there is in the room, the more our brain has to fill in the gaps. So if you've ever been in a dark room and you see something in the corner and it looks like a shadowy person, then you look a little closer or turn the light on and you discover, oh, it's just a guitar case, for example. Well, in the dark, there's a lot less visual information, but your brain is so used to filling in the gaps, it will keep filling in the gaps. And sometimes those things it fills in don't quite make sense. So the darker it is, the more we are disposed to hallucinating because we have to fill in more gaps. But even in the light, again, only this tiny percentage of what we're actually seeing is based off of visual information. The rest is basically our brain functioning like an AI upscaling algorithm, and it's just filling in those gaps based off of our experience. So this is why sometimes when someone's driving, they actually don't see a car there because the brain is trying to process so much information and it just kind of leaves that part out. And that leads to car accidents sometimes. Sometimes when a person is reading, they'll skip words and things like that. It all depends on how our brain is going to fill in those gaps based off of experience. So this brings me to a very interesting thought experiment called Plato's Cave. And in this scenario, there are a bunch of people that are chained up in a dark cave, and there's a fire and a wall, and behind the wall there are puppeteers making shadow puppets that are casting images of shadows on the wall for everyone that is chained up to see. Now these people have been chained up in the cave for so long, they have no awareness of the outside world. And because of this, they believe that the shadow puppet world is the real world. But what if someone comes in, unshackles one of these people, and brings them out of the cave and into the light? And in the process, they see the puppeteers, and they see that it's all an illusion. Well, keep this idea in mind. And think about how only 10 to 30% of what we see is actually from our eyes. Is it possible that our very construct of reality is like Plato's cave, where we're seeing these shadows on the wall and we think this is the reality, but if we could step outside of the cave, we could see that it's a much more expansive and beautiful world where everything is just so much brighter and more profound and more meaningful? And I would say, yes, that is pretty much exactly how reality is. We think that this is the way things are, this construct that we've made of time and space, this construct of how things look, how things sound, how things smell. It's a mental construct made by our consciousness. Reality as we experience it is a product of being observed. In physics, there's this very famous effect called the observer effect, where the very act of observing an experiment interferes with the experiment. It changes the very thing we're trying to measure. And that's a lot like what happens with reality. the very act of being part of reality affects the way that we see it. And it allows us to build this construct of time and space and live in that construct and kind of pretend that time progresses linearly, that there is a past, a present, and a future. And that's just all in a straight line. But the reality, if we can step out of that cave, that construct of space-time, if we could step out of that, we can see that reality itself is a lot more like a cotton ball, where everything is a web of strands interweaving with each other. And within those strands, there are structures of strands that are different from each other, but they're all interconnected. And some of us are pieces of those structures, and others are other pieces. And these structures form a sort of web, a web of energy, that sometimes are referred to as the light web. And in these energetic structures, there is a code, like the code to a computer program or a video game. And this code never really changes. It's always there. The past, present, and future are always in the code. And I'll elaborate more on this in the future. But what I want to emphasize is that the existence code is a way of describing reality. It's not an immutable fact, because there's no such thing as knowing. We have to admit that we do not know. Everything is our minds, our consciousness's interpretation of experience. Everything. And there's no way of stepping out of that. There's no way of stepping out of our consciousness's way of experience, because it's always part of who we are. Now, there are some ways we can kind of step out of that a little bit, and I will get into some of those things in future videos. But in this life, there's no way of really leaving that construct. But the point of the existence code is that it explains scientific laws. It explains things that are not well explained by modern science, paranormal things, things people classify as spiritual experiences, or things that are supernatural they seem supernatural. Things like precognition, or having dreams that come true, or deja vu, or these things that science just explains away as coincidence or psychological effects. Well, the existence code explains those a lot more thoroughly. And for me, it helps me find purpose and meaning in our existence. So I'm hoping that before I dive further in to the existence code, I hope that you can take a second to accept that what you think you know is a construct. It's like a set of glasses that you put on that allows you to see the world through a different shade. But if you took those glasses off, the world would look differently. What you think you know is like an interface. It's like a set of VR goggles that lets you interact with a certain realm of being. But we can wear different sets of goggles and we can see things differently. So, if you can accept that knowing is impossible, and that they're just ways of seeing rather than knowing, and that we see with our minds more than we see with our eyes, then what I will explain in future videos will make an awful lot more sense. That's all I have for now until my next video, and I hope you all have a lovely day. Bye then.